Good evening. This is Dan Beiser. Time for Thursday night hour of prayer. We get underway here with a couple announcements and welcome to February as we start a new month. And best time to do these Thursday night hour of prayers is either very close of the month or the beginning of the month. So as we get underway tonight, we'll look at a few of those things. What's coming for February? That again for us to confess for things done in January or not done, and then to look ahead for February again, seeking the Lord for His kingdom purposes and again for what He wants to do in us. So again, we getting ready here in the next month or two. This will be about 4 years that we've been doing this hour of prayer. Back in COVID, we started this to help and to encourage with prayer lives, what you do in your secret closet. And again, it is the lesson that we keep stating and teaching and using. The What you do in your secret closet is going to matter and it's going to impact the corporate prayer meeting that we do together on Sundays. Sunday church services, we always pray corporately in the church, in the worship services here at Kaiser and at Fox's Hollow. This Sunday is the first Sunday in February, and so we won't have Sunday school. We just use that time for prayer. And then Sunday night is the first and third of Sunday night of each month. We have the community prayer up at Emmanuel Church at 6 o'clock. So those corporate prayer times is what happens during those prayer times comes out of moments like this for your secret closet and what you do when you're alone with the Lord in this. Now we've been given self-helps. We've used the standard of worship, confession, and petition, and we've covered a lot of that, and then kind of broke away, gave you the seven prayer targets in the prayer notebook. How to pray for those things. We'll go over a couple of those things here in a moment. But then we got into some word studies, especially directed in the worship, how you approach God. And so the phrase that we're on right now is before the Lord. And we are in the book of Numbers, chapter 17. Numbers, chapter 17. If you have your Bible, a notebook to write down the book, the chapter, the verse, so that you can have these verses in your word study and use it for your prayer time as well. And the focus of this is that how do you come before God? And again, we're supposed to come with clean hands, pure heart. We're supposed to come seeking Him. We're supposed to come worshiping Him, adoring Him. And a lot of people don't have any thought of that. They just run into God's presence, make their requests known, spiel what's on their heart and mind, and then run back out. God has no time to speak to them. They have no time to listen. That's a very poor prayer ethic in that. So we look at these verses of how people come before the Lord. As I started into this months ago, and as we was coming through, I noticed in my Bible readings, because I just came through Numbers and Deuteronomy, I've noticed this other phrase, and I've been trying to point them out to you, unto the Lord. It is, and there are other phrases, and we're going to see some of those even here this evening, of those things that happen before God, before the Lord. Most of this in the book of Exodus, Leviticus, and even in the first parts of Numbers that we were looking at, it is about bringing the sacrifices before the Lord. A lot of repetition there for that, and we're going to kind of get out of that now. We're going to kind of leave all that behind as we're over the halfway mark here for Numbers and go into Deuteronomy with that. And then I've been noticing it as I came through Joshua and Judges in my Bible reading is that it really is going to drop off. So we're going to accelerate a lot after we get out of the book of Numbers and Deuteronomy with that. But we still got probably a month of February to go through these chapters of Numbers and Deuteronomy, and then we'll get to some of those specific things about things that happen that we can incorporate into our time of how we come before the Lord. So again, let's look at these things. Then we'll do this for about 25 minutes and break off because there's a host of things that I want to give to you tonight as far as prayer targets. That again, as we're looking at what has transpired in your first month of this year, I wish we could all say that we came to January 31st and we could all say, boy, this was a great beginning. This was a great month. But I've already heard the testimonies from some. It's been a struggle. It's been a battle, and they almost limping just through the first month. So we'll pray that, of course, February would see different results from that. And then again for the churches, a lot of these things that are happening and going on that we want to cover, and for the nation as well. And then we'll go over some of our stats for the first month of 2024 with that. All right, so let's get underway. Numbers chapter 17. There are 4 verses: verse 4, verse 7, verse 9, and verse 10. And a lot of this is a parallel or a repeat of that. This is where the children of Israel, where we left off last week, the children of Israel had come against Moses, against Aaron, and they were rebellious against God. They were murmuring, they were complaining, and that was what they did before the Lord. And so again, when you sin before the Lord, there's consequences. And there was a lot of judgment. There was a lot of death, and we're not done yet. Here in chapter 17, God is trying to stop all this and put it to rest. And so the way that he did that was that he said for each elder of each tribe that they were supposed to bring a rod, and they were supposed to set it. And we read in verse 4, thou shalt lay them up in the tabernacle of the congregation before the Lord, before the testimony. The testimony is the Ark of the Covenant. That's before the Lord, because that's where God came down and rested on the Ark of the Covenant, on the top of that, where I will meet with you. And again, inside the testimony is where God met with Aaron and with Moses in that. So they were supposed to bring these rods and lay them out. And the one that God chose, that's the ordained priesthood, the one that God would do. And here we're going to read that it was Aaron's rod, that they took a stick, laid it in there, and Aaron's rod grew branches, leaves, and almonds. It was a miracle with that. So it was supposed to be laid up inside of the Holy of Holies there, where it would be brought before the Lord. So we got in verse 7, and Moses laid up the rods before the Lord in the tabernacle. This is Moses following and obeying that instruction with that. Then verse 9, Moses brought out all the rods from before the Lord. That's where they was at. And unto the children of Israel, and they looked and took every man his rod. And the Lord said unto Moses, bring Aaron's rod again before the testimony to be kept for a token against the rebels. And thou shalt quite take away their murmurings from me, that they die not. So Aaron's rod sprouted, grew branches, grew leaves, grew almonds, and it was the miracle. It was God's selection in that, and it was supposed to silence the rest of the tribes of their complaining, their murmuring, and their threatening against Moses and Aaron with that. So it is that you understand that there is not circumstances and situations in our life that God doesn't know about. God knows those that speak against us. God knows those that come against us. He knows our enemies because generally they're his enemies. The Lord's enemy is our enemy. And we have to understand that the enemy cannot do anything against God. So he comes against us because he can. He can get at us. He can tempt us. He can afflict us. And there's a lot that goes into that. But that kind of thing where we see those that come against the church, come against Christians, they are doing this before the Lord. And God sees it. God hears it. God knows it. And this is one of those instances in Numbers chapter 17 of how God dealt with it in the midst of that. Now jumping into chapter 18, we got a lot of verses here. We start off verse 2, 12, 13, 17, and 19, and a couple more here in a moment. Numbers 18, verse 2. This is taking the children of Levi for the priesthood. Then thy brethren also of the tribe of Levi, the tribe of thy father, bring thou with you, that they may be joined unto you and minister unto you, But thou and thy sons with you shall minister before the tabernacle of witnesses. The Levite tribe was supposed to help Aaron and his sons with the work of maintaining the tabernacle. Aaron and Moses was the prophet. Aaron was the high priest, and the sons of Aaron, now not Nadab and Abihu because they died back in Leviticus chapter 10, they were the ones that were supposed to bring the offerings. They were the ones who were supposed to keep the candles and supposed to maintain all the rituals that was going on inside the tabernacle. And the children of Levi were supposed to be brought unto them to help. They were supposed to have wood. They were supposed to, help with any of the things when they moved from place to place. They had special assignments and all of that. But you see that Aaron and his sons' responsibility was to minister before the tabernacle. You and I, are, as children of God, are saints. We have that place that we do on Sunday that we come together to worship, but we have this thing that we don't talk about a lot, and it is to minister. Now, minister is to give service, it is to give aid, it is to, at this time, worship for that of the offerings, the prayers. We come before God sometimes, and again, it is not always for us to be ministered unto, but it is for us to minister to others. And that could be, acts of kindness, service, deeds done for help, and those kind of things in the midst of this. But when we read this, that same title that was given to Aaron and to his sons is the same thing that we do when we go into our prayer chamber. We come before the Lord to minister unto him. I know that a lot of times our mindset is because of our sins and our failures that we think we're just so unworthy, but we are called to be ministers of the gospel. That means take the gospel to the world. But doing this in our secret closet, it is that we minister before the Lord for the things of his kingdom. And that is that calling that is laid upon us in that. And there's a lot that goes into that. And if you have questions, you can follow up with me on that. But that's another great study in the midst of that. That's verse 2, chapter 18, verse 2, down to verse 12. All the best of the oil, the best of the wine, the wheat, the first fruits of them which they shall offer. And here's our phrase, unto the Lord. So bringing the tithe, bringing the sacrifices, the offerings, that which the Lord had given to them for their tithe, for the children of Levite, what they were supposed to have. Verse 13, and whatsoever is first ripe in the land, which they shall bring unto the Lord, bring your first fruits unto the Lord. Same thing with the tithe that you bring. This was God taking care of the children of Aaron and the priest of what they were supposed to be doing. It shall be thine, everyone that is clean in thy house shall eat of it. Verse 17, but the firstling of a cow, firstling of a sheep, firstling of a goat, thou shalt not redeem. They are holy. Thou shalt sprinkle their blood upon the altar, shalt burn their fat for an offering made by fire. We looked at this a week or two ago, the sweet savor, for a sweet savor unto the Lord. And again, we talked about that. Your prayers are a sweet savor that goes up to him. Your praise, your thanksgiving is a sweet savor that goes up before the Lord. Now, the phrase is unto the Lord, but it's the same image of coming before the Lord with that. So unto the Lord, verse 19, same thing, unto the Lord. All the heave offerings of the holy things which the children of Israel offer unto the Lord have I given to you. There's two in this thing. And then at the very last of that phrase, verse 19, it is a covenant of salt forever before the Lord. A covenant of salt. Very rare do you hear about this. Old timers used to maintain this, and that phrase was used a good bit more inside the church and in agreements. A covenant of salt, a strong bond. It is a agreement that comes, a covenant, first of all, a covenant is an agreement, but adding the salt in it means is that it is just like what we use salt for, to preserve. This agreement is preserved, and we have that phrase, before the Lord. Our covenants to God are extremely important. So we come beginning of this year, 2024, as we got ready to get underway, you made agreements before the Lord. You said, Lord, I want to do this in 2024. I want to read my Bible through. I want to memorize some verses. I want to increase my prayer life. I want to be able to witness. Lord, open doors for me. Show me where I'm supposed to go. That was your covenant. You were supposed to maintain and follow through with that as the days go by. And now as we come into February, you can answer the question, has it been fulfilled? Did God keep his part? Did you keep your part? A covenant is between two different groups. So it is between God and us. Covenant of salt, it's a bond. And it is that agreement which is preserved before the Lord. He's talking about the offering, the heave offering, to the children of Aaron and their sons and their daughters with the family there, but unto your seed and into thy seed with thee. So again, it is to our surrounding family that again, that covenant of salt, you can go through the covenant that God made with David. You will always have a son to sit upon the throne. Out of you shall come the covenant that he made to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the covenant with that. And the covenant that he makes to us is the church. It is needful to understand in the scriptures and to study it, the covenants that God makes with us. Because this covenant of salt, which is not used very often at all in the scriptures, just a couple times, if just not this once, it is to show the importance of it. God does not break his word. And we are to strive with all that we can not to break our word as we come in. We are to have that mind. This is a covenant of salt, Lord, that I come before you, that I'm going to give myself unto prayer. I'm going to be the Christian that I'm supposed to be. I'm going to serve you all the days of my life, right up to the very end. So, Lord, you need to show me, help me, let the Holy Spirit speak to me. You fulfill your part, and God will fulfill his part. So, very, very important verse, chapter 18, Numbers, verse 19, the covenant of salt before the Lord. Three other verses as we go down. God telling them that they will not have any land as an inheritance. Some people, again, they have land, they bought land land that's been in their family, passed from generation to generation. The children of Levite and the children of Aaron did not have that. They were not given any land inside the promised land, and he says that the Lord is your inheritance. And often that's what our mindset should be. We should not be invested in this world because we're just pilgrims passing through. And what we do have that the Lord gives to us is to be given back to him for his kingdom and his glory. So that's verse 14 or verse 24. But the tithes of the children of Israel, which they offer as a heave offering, children of Israel would bring their fruits, their vegetables, their livestock, their crops in as the first fruits unto the Lord. I have given that heave offering to the Levites. God takes care of his own with that. Verse 26, thus speak unto the Levites, saying to them, when you take of the children of Israel the tithes which I have given you from them for your inheritance, then you shall offer up a heave offering of it for the Lord. So we have before the Lord, unto the Lord, for the Lord, all in this chapter of studying this. And then verse 28, then thus you shall also offer a heave offering. We've seen that repeated now, unto the Lord of all your tithes. So the tithe comes in. It is the portion that they would bring to the Lord before the Lord. The Levites got a portion of that. The children of Aaron and his sons got a portion of that because God knew what the need would be in the midst of that. So that's chapter 18. Chapter 19, we only got one verse. Chapter 19, verse 4. And Eleazar the priest shall take of her blood with his finger, sprinkle of her blood directly before the tabernacle of the congregation 7 times. And this was the red heifer that they were to sacrifice and do this process of coming before the Lord, making the water of separation in that. So that's the only one that we have in chapter 19. Chapter 19, verse 4, the sprinkling of the blood before the Lord. Chapter 20, we have 3 verses. Verse 3, verse 6, verse 9. And the people chode with Moses, so we're back to the complaining, the murmuring, Chode means chide, is a form of chide or complain with Moses, and spake, saying, Would God that we had died with our brethren when our brethren died before the Lord. So they testify that the other people that had already been smitten by the Lord, smote by the Lord, was that they had died before the Lord. All people die before the Lord. And again, not to spend a lot of time with this, but you should remember this. We say dust to dust, ashes to ashes. The body, the flesh goes back to the dust as it was. The spirit of life, which is flowing within our bloodstream, the blood carries the life. God gives us life. God is life. And Ecclesiastes chapter 12, the spirit of life goes back to God who gave it. All things return to God. The flesh returns to the dust because we was made from dust. The spirit of life goes back to God who gave it. And the third part of our bodies, which is our eternal souls. Our souls goes to its eternal resting place of heaven or hell. But all people die before the Lord because God holds our very breath in his hand. Daniel chapter 5, Job chapter 12, verse 10, and Job chapter 12, verse 10, he says, I hold your breath and your soul in my hand. So that's a double in that with the understanding of that. These died before the Lord, and then they appear before the Lord for their determination of, well done, thou good and faithful servant, enter in, or depart from me, I never knew you. So that's chapter 20, verse 3. Chapter 20, verse 9, or verse 6, I'm sorry. And Moses and Aaron went from the presence of the assembly unto the door of the tabernacle, and they fell upon their faces, and the glory of the Lord appeared unto them. So as they come before the tent, God's cloudy pillar had come down. And, they left those people that were fighting with them, and they came before the Lord. Doesn't use that phrase, but that's where God's at. And they fall before the tabernacle, before the temple there, and they worship him, and they get ready to listen to him. And God speaks in verse 7 of what he's going to do. Verse 9, and Moses took the rod from before the Lord as he had commanded him. So this is where Moses disobeys God, because he was supposed to speak to the rock and water would come out, and he in his anger hit the rock. Now, the first time that Moses got water out of the rock, he was commanded to hit the rock. But Moses was angry at the people at this point. Miriam had just died, his sister, so you know the anguish that was there with that. The people are chiding against him, complaining, murmuring. He's had to put up with this, and it gets frustrating. And the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. And so he disobeys God. But he obeyed here. They came before the Lord. When God showed up, he's given instructions. He takes the rod from before the Lord, which was in the tabernacle, and he does all that God had asked of him to do. But he did it with a thing of disobedience. And he and Aaron were not allowed to go into the promised land because of this one act in Numbers chapter 20. Numbers chapter 21, verse 2. And when King Arad the Canaanite, which dwelt in the south, heard tell Israel came by the way of the spies, then he fought against Israel and took some of them. And Israel vowed a vow and said unto the Lord, making a vow unto the Lord. And so they said, if you give us victory here against those that have captured some of our people, Lord, we'll honor you and serve you with that. And we will utterly destroy their cities. We will defeat them because you are with us in the midst of that. But in verse 21, verse 2, they made a vow unto the Lord. Certain points in our life, we make a vow unto the Lord. When we come to Christ, it is actually when we make our confession, our profession of faith, we are making a vow to the Lord. For all the days of my life, I'm going to believe in you, serve you, and I'm going to wholly follow you. That's our vow that we make before the Lord, unto the Lord with that. And at marriage, we make a vow before the Lord. At the baby dedication, the children dedication, we make a vow that we'll raise them in the fear of the Lord, in the knowledge of the Lord, and do all that we're supposed to do. So those are baptism. We do the same thing. We are professing. We go into the waters of baptism to share our testimony. And we're making a vow that as we go into those waters is that, again, it is not just an act. It's not just an emotion. It is a vow unto the Lord. Throughout life, and you have this in the Old Testament, other people make vows. And God has very strict things. And again, he says and gives a warning, don't ever make a vow and not keep it unto the Lord or before the Lord, because God will hold us guilty for not fulfilling it. So it is better to not say anything than to make a vow to the Lord and then not follow through with it. So if you make a pledge to the Lord, you better do all that you can to fulfill it. And again, I like that as the statement that was of Samuel the prophet. And the Lord did not let any of his words fall to the ground. And I wish that would be all for all of us when we take these vows unto the Lord, but it's just not so. And so there is a lot of those who made vows unto the Lord and they've not kept the word. We're going to have to answer for that. And so make sure that you are not a part of that. So we've had the covenant of salt, a vow unto the Lord, all these things very important of how we come before God when we speak of things in our prayer times about things of our family, our future, our nation, his church, all these things very important in the midst of that. So that's chapter 21, verse 2, making a vow unto the Lord. Let me do chapter 22 and I'll stop, and then we got to get into all these things that are going on. There is a host of verses that is here in chapter 22. This is where Balak, a prince, a king of Midian, tries to hire Balaam to speak against the children of Israel. Balaam was one that he said, that what you say, God gives you, God blesses, and God curses according to your mouth. This is where the donkey speaks to Balaam. You should know this account that goes over these next couple chapters. So just let me give you the verses here and the reference to it. The first one is in chapter 22, verse 9. And God came unto Balaam. So as, again, in nighttime, it doesn't say that Balaam came before the Lord, but it is that God comes and he's asking Balaam, who are these men? It is not our direct phrase of before the Lord, but Balaam is before God because God came to him. I don't have time to mark all those in the scriptures of when God came before them. There's a host of those moments, especially back in Genesis, but just so that you understand that Balaam is before the Lord having a conversation, and he's told not to go with them, and he doesn't obey. So that's verse 9. Then verse 20, same thing. And God came unto Balaam, and he said unto them, if the men come and get you in the morning, then you can rise up and go with them. Well, the men never came and got him. He got up and went with them. He did not listen nor obey the word of the Lord. That's verse 20. Verse 9, verse 20, and God came unto Balaam, and the Balaam was before the Lord. Then we jump down to verse 22 through 27, verse 31 and 34. So there's a lot of these. Go through them real quick. And this is a phrase of God's, when Balaam disobeyed and the donkey was trying to save him from the angel of the Lord that had drawn a sword and was going to kill Balaam. And the donkey does all these things. And you see this phrase, standing before the angel of the Lord, or stood before the angel of the Lord in this. So that's the phrase that's repeated over and over. And the ass saw the angel of the Lord. So he is before the angel of the Lord. Throughout the Old Testament, the angel of the Lord is that picture there of coming before God. That picture that I've painted 1,000 times for you, the four beasts, the throne, God sits upon the throne. Revelation chapter 4, and John looked up and he saw a throne, and he that sat on him was to look upon specific colors that emanated from him. He that sits upon the throne is he that lives forever and ever. That's the title of God the Father. Then we have Christ who sits at the right hand, the seven spirits, which is the Spirit of God is before him, the 24 elders, which are around them, a whole host of things of this standing before the Lord. And the angels there are a part of that which God sends out from before him to accomplish him. So even though it is not the Lord, the angel of the Lord is an extension of God in that. And that's why I include this in our study. So verse 23, the ass saw the angel of the Lord standing in the way. Verse 24, the angel of the Lord stood right before them. He's right before them. Verse 25, when the ass saw the angel of the Lord, again, all this happening right before them, Balaam and the donkey. Verse 26, and the angel of the Lord went further and stood in a narrow way, a narrow place. Verse 27, when the ass saw the angel of the Lord, she fell down. Verse 28, and the Lord opened his mouth of the ass, and she said unto Balaam, what have I done to you that you have smitten me these 3 times? So that's up to verse 27. Verse 31, 34, then the Lord opened the eyes of Balaam, and he saw the angel of the Lord standing right before him, before the Lord, standing before him with his sword drawn. Verse 34, and Balaam said unto the angel of the Lord, I have sinned, for I knew not that you stood in the way. Again, not for blessing, but to kill him. And he stood before him. He was before the Lord as the angel stood there ready to kill him. So let us stop right there. That was a whole passage there. And we'll pick up with chapter 23 next week. All right. Like I said, rapidly go through the rest of Numbers through Deuteronomy, and then it's going to get sparse, and it's really going to accelerate as we go through the rest of the scriptures with that phrase before the Lord. There won't be as many of these other variances of that, of how we come before the Lord. But those 2 tonight, again, if you can meditate on them and focus on them, your covenant of salt and your vows before the Lord, and give place to that in the midst of all this. All right, a whole host of things to get underway here for this last 25 minutes of our time together. The first thing is that, again, at the close of the month and at the beginning of the month. So January 31st into February 1st, which we sit here tonight, it is to count the blessings of the Lord. We had a little bit of that Monday night. Of sharing about that, and that's the reason we're going to sing Count Your Many Blessings on Sunday for that, because again, God has been good. We've had answered prayers, we've had mercies, miracles, just a host of things that God has done, and we thank him and give him praise for that. So again, it is to understand, again, always be grateful, always be thankful, and there'll be someone who'll say, well, I don't see anything, or I don't have any answered prayers. It is even seasons of dryness and drought, still give God praise. And again, this might be the month for that. So it is to count your blessings for what God has done, preserving you, protecting you, allowing you to get through January as we start this new month. That's the close of the month and the beginning of the month. Always give thanksgiving and praise for what God has done over the last month, and especially as we get underway for this year with that. The second thing is confession. We realize that, again, and many have already testified to this and stated it, it's been a rough month. Sins have been predominant, unfaithfulness, neglect, disobedience. And so those things, Lord, I don't want February to be like January. I missed too many days in my Bible. I missed too many days in the prayer chamber. I missed too much church. I haven't witnessed to anybody and asked them personally about their relationship with Christ or soul. Maybe you've missed all of our fasts. We fast every Thursday. Maybe you've missed the fast. So whatever it is that, again, that comes to your mind and your heart, Holy Spirit convicts you, it is to cleanse all that which has taken place over the last month. Again, God's been faithful. God's been blessing and preserving, protecting, providing. thank him for that. But at the same time, recognize and realize that it has been such a good month as far as service and yieldedness to the Lord. So it is with confession that you say to the Lord the very specific sins that has taken place in the month of January. You don't want that going on and holding over you for the month of February. So blessings, thanksgiving, and confessions to be done at the end of the month and the first of the month with that. Now, third thing, it is to look ahead. What is this month going to bring? You and I do not know. So it is that you must be before the Lord to seek of him, ask of him, Lord, what is it that you would have me to do this month? Now, as we just talked about, you be very careful about making a vow and not keeping it. You're going to make a vow, then keep it. And again, it's not just saying words, idle, vain, repetition words. It is to follow through with it. If you're going to speak it to God, then do it. So ask the Lord to help you with what you're supposed to do for this new month. Now, some of the headlines, the topics that, again, that we've been going over, one of them, the most major thing right now, is the escalation of war that's over in the Middle East. Now, the good news tonight is that there is a ceasefire on the table and hostage release between Hamas and Israel. And so if they can get those 100 prisoners that have been captured since October the 7th and get the release of them for a ceasefire, that will be tremendous in the de-escalation of that situation that is there. But the war, as far as Israel against Hamas, Israel is not going to stop pursuing Hamas until they have annihilated them for what they did on October the 7th. So that battle is still going on. One of the things, again, is looking at the escalation between Iran and the United States. We are set by President Biden's declaration. They are going to, for the 3 U.S. soldiers that were killed by the drone attack in Jordan, tonight or tomorrow, they will start bombings against Iranian-held positions in Syria and Iraq. Iran has already said that if such things would happen, is that they will consider that to be an attack on Iran itself as a declaration of war. So it's an increase. But again, your prayers, soldiers in harm's way, civilians in harm's way. War, again, is God's judgments. He unleashes it. It's a part of the first 7 seals of Revelation chapter 6, if you go through them. War is upon a world. Jesus said there will always be wars and rumors of wars. But again, when it's good versus evil, there is a need to eradicate the evil because of what they stand for and what their purposes are. And that's what Hamas has done. And Iran is not far behind that. But how you pray for that, we have, again, there are lives to be preserved. How this impacts missionaries. When war is done, it limits proselyting missionaries to get in there and do the work. But at the same time, it gives them a greater opportunity in war-torn areas to minister to those that are in need for what they're having to go through with that. So pray for Christians to be in place, but be protected amidst all this that's going to be escalating, it seems, over this next month of February, as we see it here tonight. So one victory, but at the other side of it, we have other issues that are going on. In our country, again, just the anarchy, the disarray, crisis at the border with all this that's going on. Our nation is under great judgment. And we've seen the natural disasters. We see these kind of political things that are happening. We see our economy. All these things impacted our cities, our streets. So here for the first of the month, it is to pray a cry to God to go before us for this month, that the days, the hours, the minutes would be for his glory. It is to pray for, again, your city and all that's entailed in that, schools, businesses, our streets, our homes, the people, the citizens, praying for God to do a work in the midst of all those different areas, to pray for the churches, to pray for the pastors. And again, it's yielding it to the Lord. A church and a pastor that will not serve the Lord, will not follow scriptures, again, Lord, just shut it down. If it's not for your glory, then remove it. If they're not going to preach the gospel in the pulpits, then silence them and remove them. And again, to preserve the blessing of God's kingdom. Lord, thy kingdom come, thy will be done. So first of the month, praying for God's kingdom to go forth. Now again, that goes to not just again to our locale of our city, communities, and those kind of things, but it's across our nation and the nations. It's to the continents. It's to the direction of north, south, east, and west for God's purposes to be done for the kingdom to glorify his name in the midst of all that. That's part of the thing, again, looking at the blessings of the Lord for what he does and what he gives to us for use of the kingdom. So again, you're praying, this is coming up on a year anniversary of Asbury, the Asbury revival that went on for several weeks. 50,000 people attended that thing. Many were moved and encouraged by that. But it's not the revival that we talk about of days gone by where God's Holy Spirit come down and the whole city shut down and whole families were impacted. The lost were saved. The backslidden had been reclaimed and come back. There a flourishing of God's purpose and God's kingdom. That's what all that's about. And so again, it's looking at the things of God's kingdom for revival for the church, greatly needed. There is really no other answer for the church. There is such a disarray right now of the Christian church in America. This thing with Alistair Begg going on. Many of you probably don't even know what I'm talking about, but there's been this onslaught because, again, of something that he had said, and it just continues on social media. And again, it's to refine people in their positions of what are you going to stand for, and what are you going to compromise with, and what are you going to allow. And there's lines that are to be drawn that you don't cross. And so pray for the church. Pray one for another. Again, the month of February, it's going to bring trials. It's going to bring tribulations. It's going to bring sickness. It's going to bring death. And we need the Lord. And so again, pray for each other because we don't know what tomorrow holds. And again, the old hymn, I don't know about tomorrow, but I know who holds my hand. Great, great imagery, great meditation with that. But trust in the Lord. Lean upon him in this and strive to make February better than what January was. Every hour, every day, be faithful. When you fail, get right before the Lord, confess the sin, get back right up and come before the Lord as often as you possibly can. These are the things, again, unfolding for circumstances, situations around. We have our continual prayer targets. We have the drugs and the alcohol, the addiction that is there. That is a snare, a binding of Satan upon our society. The percentage of those that are addicted to alcohol, drugs, is astronomical. Is it 50%? Is it 70% of our population is addicted to one or the other or both? All of our crime comes from that generally. Minds and hearts can't break that addiction with that because, again, the Lord is needed to break the chains that Satan has placed upon these people. These are our loved ones. These are people that we know. These are people in the church, out of the church, people at work, people at the schools. There are the addictions of perversion that continues on throughout our country, and all this stuff continues to be revealed about what's being done in the secrets and in the darkness of our streets and our cities, and these that are in power. Our children are targeted, affected, and just great evil. That things, again, that we ought not be hearing, that we are hearing. Things that ought not be happening, which are happening. And it is you and I that are to pray for such moments, such times, at the first of this month. Lord, go before us. and deliver us from evil. So pray for one another, for preserving, protecting, blessing as the church, as Christians, that we would be what we're supposed to be, and pray against these things of addiction, perversion, evil, minds and hearts evil affected. Pray against that again, God would restrain them from acting out on the evil of reprobate minds that's happening and unfolding. Again, the headlines reveal this. A man up Pennsylvania, son decapitated his father. Horrible headline. Evil happenings of all that. You saw those immigrants that had been arrested up in New York City after 4 or 5 of them had pummeled a New York City police officer, and they smiled and they laughed as they were released from jail less than 24 hours after they had done it. If I would have done that, I'd still be in jail. But they are released and out on the streets and mocking and laughing. This is the anarchy and evil of our day. Things are not right. And it's not about an election. It's not about the White House. It's not about the Congress. It's not even about the Supreme Court. It is about the spiritual fabric that is in our nation, in our society today. We need the Lord, and it is the church's responsibility. It is an hour of prayer, coming before the Lord on a daily basis. Psalm 55, evening, morning, and at noon will I come before the Lord and lift up my cry before him. This is what we're supposed to be doing in this hour of evil, of what the headlines are revealing, what we know that's going on in our families, what we know the struggle is in our own lives, crying out to God, have mercy. In wrath, remember mercy, Lord. So it is, revival fixes this, but we're not there. And so until that time comes, it is for us to seek the Lord, call upon him. Seek the Lord while he may be found. Seek him and you shall find him when you search for him with all your heart. These are the directives and the instructions of what we're supposed to be doing. Strive in the month of February to do this on a daily basis before the Lord. So much is at stake. We've gone years and months and weeks without the church in a corporate sense being desperate and crying out for God. I tell this account quite often, so let me use it here and we'll get ready to wrap things up. There was a meeting held in Florida way back in the 90s, and they had a man that had gotten out of Rwanda. If you know the occasion, I think it was in the mid to late 80s, is that there was a genocide. You hear that term today, genocide happening in between Israel and Hamas right now. All of Islam wants to genocide, eradicate all of Israel, and they are pitching a fit that Israel is eradicating Hamas in Gaza. So this term is used a lot, genocide. But back in the 80s, Rwanda, there was a legitimate genocide happening between two factions. Army would come in and the people would run for their lives, and so they wouldn't go into the waters, but the tribal people would go into the waters for safety, and there they would have to stay all night. And you could hear the man testifying. He said you could hear the cries of mothers for their sons and their children and people for their loved ones, and just a cry in the darkness going up in that water as they hid out there for safety. And just an awful ordeal that went through, and how God preserved a few, a remnant, and so many tens of thousands died in that massacre that was going on. And he made this statement, and he was talking to U.S. prayer leaders and pastors down in Florida, and he made this statement. He said, we cried with desperation because there was desolation, destruction that was happening to our tribes, our families, our way of life in that. And that statement is to be pinned there. What we see happening with all these headlines and all these happenings, if we don't cry out of desperation, we will cry out in desolation, and it'll be too late. and my focus, the curses that we're studying on Monday night, these things are happening and accelerating. And it is that when we get to the other side of God's final judgment on our nation, and all of our way of life is done, we'll wish that we would have prayed more while we had freedom, opportunity, convenience, all of that. But we're not desperate. And so pray for the month of February a spirit of desperation upon the church, that we would cry out to God before it is too late. We cry out to God for our lost souls in that same way. It does us no good to go into the funeral home and cry and say, oh, I hope they were saved, when you had available, ample opportunity to speak to them while they were living. And so it is, make that cry, desperate. Lord, don't let my loved one go to hell. Plead with God. You know, the rich man in hell was desperate. Send Lazarus back to my 5 brethren and tell them not to come here. It couldn't happen. It wouldn't happen. But he was desperate. Don't let them come here. And if there was anybody that we know that died and went to hell, they would tell us the same thing. Be more desperate before you come to a moment of desolation. So here's where we're at tonight with that. Spiritual fabric, the moral compass, whatever you want to call it, in our nation is obliterated. We have chaos and anarchy on our streets. We have the politicians, the economy, all this, all these things that are happening in our nation. These are the judgments of God. This is not because of political or anything. This is a judgment of God upon us because we have forsaken him, forgotten him, and abandoned him. We don't want him unless we get desperate. So I don't want to have to go through a crisis to get desperate when I know that I ought to be desperate now. And so again, I pray for that fervency. I pray for that urgency. I pray for that because of the emergency that's upon our society. Again, lost souls every day, crying out to God for them. We have a list on our bulletin handout, names, relationship to those that are concerned about their eternal destination of their loved one. We are praying not just for ours, but for each other's with that. Close out now, just here in these last moments. We're finishing, so we finished the first month of January, and again, the stats are not good. 4 police officers have been shot and killed. That means 1 per week. We started that last year, so that trend is continuing, 1 per week. That's too many. I mean, you remember, you could go 6 months and never have a police officer shot and killed. You could go almost a full year, or maybe a whole year, and have 1. And now here we are, every week there's a police officer being shot and killed. There was a school shooting. It was after school, but it was still on grounds. It was videotaped down in Georgia. I don't know of any loss of life, but it was point blank. It was a video of it, so pretty tragic with that. Mass shootings, we've seen about 1 per day. It's right around 30 some. Mass murders, we've had about 7 mass murders, and so again, that's almost 2 a week of mass murders. The mass murders of 4 or more people are shot and killed, and then the murder suicides are running 2 a day. These are epidemics that I've talked about time and time again each week with you. I share, and again, these are judgments of God because of the wickedness, because of the abominations of where we're at. We just desperately need God. Is there a desperation in your prayer? Again, if it's not for yourself, but at least lift up your eyes and look around. Jesus beheld the city and wept over it. Do you weep over these things? Do you heartbroken? God says, I dwell with him that is of a broken and a contrite spirit. Are you broken and contrite before the Lord? Our nation is coming apart. And again, I use that analogy and illustration time and time again. In the book of Exodus, when the children of Israel were going across the Red Sea on dry ground, God was delivering them, but the Egyptians pursued. And it says, and God looked down on the Egyptians, and he made the chariot wheels fall off. And they cried out, the Lord is against us. And they tried to turn around and run. And God told Moses, stretch out your staff, and the waters come back upon the Egyptians and drown them. And you know the song that Miriam sang, the horse and the rider have fallen into the sea. And God made the chariot wheels fall off right before the waters came back upon them. The chariot wheels are come off. Our society, decency, normal. You can't even define normal anymore. We are so filled with chaos and abominations, every fabric of our society. And God's making the chariot wheels fall off. And the judgments are continuing and accelerating. It's the reason I give you the stats, because of what we see happening, natural disasters, death, dying, addictions, our children, the impact on them, which is long range, the LGBT and all of the evil that goes with that. These things continue. And a revival is what we need for God to stay the judgments that are happening and give us a time. Who knows if the Lord will turn and repent and leave a blessing behind him, because that's what we need. A time to repent, a time to come back to him for the very sake of our future and the very sake of our families in the midst of this. Desperation, where is it found in the American church today? It better be found in your secret closet, because you and I are the fabric that holds for the church and for the sake of our families, our cities, and our future. It is by your prayers. Be faithful to pray and cry out to God for these things that we share here on Thursday night, hour of prayer. In our study in the first 30 minutes, how you come before the Lord, a covenant of salt, a vow before the Lord, all those phrases we're going to continue to look at and go throughout the scripture, so that you can have that and have in your mind and read it, how you come before the Lord. It matters. It matters how you come before God. I know we have the invitation song, Just As I Am, Jesus I Come, and people say, just come as you are, come any old way, but that's a half truth. God gives us clear instructions about how we're supposed to approach before the Lord, and that's what I want you to see in this word and phrase study. All right, thank you for being on tonight. Welcome to the new month. Brethren, give yourself to prayer. Psalm 109, verse 4. Many of you know that's my theme verse. I give myself unto prayer. Be men and women of prayer. And let's bring that into our corporate prayer meetings for Sunday. Good night. God bless.